Hello, friends. Today we're going to talk about the book size that might apply most for your particular book. There are standard book sizes in the world of books, and of course, book size typically refers to hard copy. You don't have to worry about the size of the page if you are producing only an ebook file because there is no page technically. So this is typically more for the hard copy books, and book size, what size your book ends up being produced, is dependent upon a few variables that you need to start thinking about now. And the reason you need to start thinking about it now is because your book size will also impact other design elements. And when we say design, we mean the interior design. All of your content is done and written. You're not editing. This moves into that next phase of book publishing, and that is the design of your interior, the layout, the format, how the text looks, and all of that. So while you may think book size is like one of the last things you adjust, you actually want to consider this pretty early on in the process so that when you start applying some of the design elements such as font type, line justification, and all of that, your page size does not adjust later on and throw everything off. So let's get into this, and we'll talk about how you may go about deciding what the perfect book size is for your memoir. So when we're talking about the book size, it can vary by genre, so we'll talk about that. Some publishers have particulars that they do for certain genres or certain reasons, but we are going to talk about what a self-publishing author may consider if they are going to be printing some physical copies of their book, like in a print on demand situation, okay? So there are some things you want to consider. First of all, when we are talking about book size, you are going to hear this term trim size. That's essentially the same thing. What trim size really means is that after they print your book, they trim the pages to the exact size so that every page is uniform. I don't know if you've ever seen a book that hasn't been correctly trimmed and it kind of is ruffly a little bit, and the page sizes vary just slightly. The trim size is exactly how it's going to be looking and where all the pages are even on all four sides, okay? So it's just the width and the height of your book. And in the United States, we measure in inches, so I'm going to kind of use that for my example, but a standard book size is something like 6 by 9, 6 inches by 9, 6 inches by 9 inches, okay? So we'll talk more about the actual numbers, but that is what a trim size is. So if you upload your book on KDP and they go, well, what trim size is it? You're going to go, oh, 6 by 9 or whatever the answer is. That is what they mean when they say book or when they say trim size. It's your book size. So you need to care about book size or trim size for a few different reasons. Number one, as I said, it affects the way your book looks on the inside. It affects the way the words are presented on the page, the white space, and how that applies throughout the book. The font you may choose to use, the type of font, the size of it, the font style, and all of that can be affected by the book size. So you need to decide this pretty early on in the game, especially before you finalize things. This should not be the last thing that you adjust on that document, okay? But also, think about your readers' enjoyment. Are they going to want to hold a big, giant, thick book? I don't know if you can see behind me that way. One of the books on my bookshelf up there, a lot of those are my client books that they have sent me, but there are some that I just threw up there because it was a good size or I wanted them up there. But one of the biggest, fattest ones in the middle is Ayn Rand, and it's just a beefy book. It's hundreds and hundreds. It's probably over 1,000 pages. Would I want that in a little 4x7 size? No, because it would be 8 inches tall, right? But would you want to drag something around that's 11 by 17 inches? That's not enjoyable as a reader. So Reader enjoyment when it comes to how your book is going to be held in their hand. Is it too thick? Is it kind of wimpy and too thin and wiggly and, floppy all over? Think about that. That may be hard to conceptualize, but consider how you feel when something is too big in your hand, like your phone or your tablet or something. I've had two very different laptops, there's the word I'm looking for, in my career. I've had this tiny little one that was just zippy and little, and I could take it everywhere, but I have had a bigger, beefy one that had like a 10 key on it and, a 10 pad. So I liked that format, that version of it, but it was huge. So I had different reasons why I enjoyed different things. Think about it for your book. What do you think these readers are going to be doing? Maybe they want to shove it in their bag and take it to the beach. They want to, be able to read it on the bus or whatever it is. This isn't a textbook, so they're not going to probably be highlighting and making notes in the margin. So there are reasons why your trim size matters in that category. Again, it's going to affect the book presentation, but that is something that it only matters in the beginning, and it doesn't necessarily matter towards the end of the book, because the readers, meaning when it gets into the reader's hand, they aren't going to care whether or not you've decided to expand it by an inch or two because it looks better in this way. They just expect that it's going to be enjoyable in their hand, in the right size, and it's going to look pretty. So those two things kind of have to go hand in hand when you think about the reader's enjoyment. There are industry standards for genre types. So, for example, a novella is going to be maybe smaller and thicker, and that's what people expect. But something that we call a trade paperback is, kind of one of those decent paper books you might pick up at Barnes & Noble, right? They're not the little cheapy grocery store, little mass market paperbacks. They're not the little ones, but they have varying ranges. And this is something like 5.5 by 8.5 inches is what they call a digest. And like a 6 by 9 is what they call a U.S. trade. That's a trade paperback size. Again, this is kind of the standard range, 5.5 and 8 by 8.5 to 6 by 9. That's the standard range for novels, memoirs, kind of standard nonfiction. If you're looking at a hard copy book, that's going to be obviously more premium format. It's going to be more costly, and they tend to be more like a 6 by 9 or bigger. So they're not going to be smaller in hardback, but they're most likely going to be on the larger end. I don't think that's probably the best fit for most memoirs because of the genre, but it can be if you want a hard copy for a certain reason. That's something to consider as well. So before picking your trim size, you want to think about the reader. You want to think about how it's displayed on the page. But overall, a couple of the factors that will help you choose the correct one besides genre is your word count. How big is your book? If your book is a longer word count, a bigger word count, the bigger your book can be, right? The bigger book size it can be. If you have a little 20,000 word book, you don't want it to be spread out by 8.5 and 11. I mean, you'll have like a 4-page book, right? But if you had a 200,000 word book, you also don't want that to be too small. You have to make that a little bit bigger so that it's the right size in someone's hand. So word count is really the kind of ultimate decider, if you will. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong or 100% accurate number, because other factors go into how the words are displayed. Again, white space, some font sizing, spacing, and all of that. So word count can be a very helpful measurement, but it's not like the end all be all of how you choose your book size. If you are going with a memoir about 80,000 to 100,000 words, a 6 by 9 is going to be pretty standard, and I wouldn't have any issues recommending that trim size to you. If you're just like, how do I choose? You're most likely going to end up using a standard font size anyway, standard spacing and stuff like that. So 6x9 should do you about right. It's not going to feel necessarily too thin. I wouldn't necessarily consider it for anything under about 80,000, just depending on, again, the other factors in your book. How much front matter do you have? How much spacing? What are the design elements? So consider all of that, but a 6x9 is most of what I see. And, that's, again, it can vary by genre. A lot of memoirs are smaller. They're not going to be over 150,000 words. So they're going to be either 6x9 or smaller. 5.5 by 8.5 that's an absolutely perfect size for a memoir as well. So it just depends on kind of the overall picture of your book. And that's why professionals do this, okay? Because there is a lot to consider. Another factor is, of course, cost. In some print-on-demand services, the number of pages are going to dictate the cost of your book. Sometimes that isn't necessarily a factor, but definitely look into it. You want to know, are you paying more to print more pages? And are you on the cusp of maybe the lower tier? If you had 3 less pages, would you pay $1 less per book? Who knows? You got to look into that. So because not only does it cost more to print your paperback, maybe that's a bit longer, it can actually eat into your royalties as well. So you want to just look at that. Again, my best advice is to look at books on the shelf, go to a bookstore, do some perusing, take out your tape measure, see what they measure up as, and see what you feel like works for yours. It's difficult to say on some books whether or not you can find the actual word count, but you can usually find the page numbers online, and maybe that helps you get a feel for, this is a 6x9 with 200 pages, or, that type of thing. So you can kind of start feeling as a reader what the experience might be. Okay, so that is book size, trim size. It's a lot to consider, so it gets its own little video, and hopefully this gives you a little bit more direction on how to choose this. When in doubt, don't stress too much about this. It's not one of those huge deal breakers. It's not going to be a huge thing that readers go, oh my gosh, this book is just too big. If you're choosing between 5.5 by 8.5 and 6x9, there's a 1/2 inch difference, right? It's not that much, but it can be one of those like, okay, I just want to do this right type of factors, right? So I hope this helps, and we are going to get more into book design, into some specifics about my next video. So I will see you there.